The air in the gymnasium was a thick, stagnant soup of sweat, rubber, and stale effort. It clung to the back of Finn's throat, a taste he had known his entire life, but had only recently begun to find suffocating. From his seat on the hard pine bench, the world was a cacophony of echoing shouts, the percussive slam of a basketball against the polished floor, and the squeal of sneakers making desperate, cutting turns. The sounds were supposed to be a comfort, the rhythm of his youth, the heartbeat of a town that worshipped the circular logic of a game. Instead, they were the bars of a cage, and he was rattling them from the inside, silently. His focus, however, was not on the frantic motion of the players, his teammates. It was on the still point at the edge of the chaos. Bo. He stood near the far hoop, arms crossed over his chest, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He wasn't a large man, not like Finn's father, the head coach, whose presence filled a room with booming noise and expectation. Bo's presence was of a different quality entirely. It was quiet, dense, like a stone at the bottom of a river. It drew things toward it. Light seemed to catch differently on the worn fabric of his gray sweatshirt. The fluorescent glare that washed everyone else out, making them look pale and vaguely ill, seemed to settle on him, carving out the sharp line of his jaw and the weary, thoughtful set of his eyes. He wasn't shouting instructions. He rarely did. He watched, and his watching was more potent than any whistle or roar. When he moved to demonstrate a defensive stance, his body was an exercise in pure economy. No wasted motion, each shift of weight deliberate and certain. Finn felt the movement in his own muscles, a sympathetic twitch, a longing to understand that kind of quiet confidence. This watching had become a sickness for Finn, a private obsession that bloomed in the suffocating heat of the gym. It felt dangerous, a wire pulled taut inside his chest that hummed with a constant, low-grade fear. He was 17. He was supposed to be thinking about girls, about the upcoming playoffs, about the lukewarm future the town had mapped out for him. He was supposed to see Bo as Coach Evans, his dad's friend since they were kids, the quiet assistant who fixed the ball machine and drove the team van when the bus broke down. An adult, a fixture, as unremarkable as the faded championship banners hanging from the rafters. But Finn saw something else. He saw the way Bo's eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue in his weathered face, would scan the court and find the one player out of position, the subtle flaw in the play. He saw the network of fine lines at their corners when he almost smiled. He noticed the way his dark hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, a detail that felt impossibly intimate. Finn's father, Coach Miller, blew his whistle, the sound sharp enough to pierce through Finn's reverie. "Miller, you daydreaming, or you planning on joining us this season?" Heat flooded Finn's face. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing a ball from the rack. The other boy snickered. He kept his eyes down, dribbling hard, the impact jarring up his arm. He could feel Bo's gaze on him now, and it was different from his father's. It wasn't impatient or mocking. It was analytical, questioning. It made his skin feel thin, transparent. He ran the drill, his movements clumsy, his thoughts a tangled mess. He felt like a fraud. Every layup, every pass was a lie, a pantomime of the boy everyone thought he was. The real Finn was stranded on the bench, lost in the silent observation of a man he shouldn't be seeing in that way. The air was too thick to breathe. The stakes were impossibly high, a precipice he hadn't even known existed until he found himself standing on its edge. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach, a visceral certainty that if he were to fall, he would never stop falling. The game was no longer on the court, it was inside him, and he was losing. The practice ended, as it always did, with the team running suicides until their lungs burned and their legs trembled. It was his father's way of grinding out weakness, of leaving everything on the court. As Finn bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air that felt like fire, he watched Bo walk the court's perimeter, collecting stray basketballs. There was a patience in the simple act, a gentleness in the way he palmed each ball and placed it in the rolling cage. He moved through the aftermath of the team's exertion with a placid grace that seemed to belong to another world. The other boys were already stampeding toward the locker room, their shouts and roughhousing echoing off the tiled walls. Finn lingered, pretending to stretch a tight calf muscle. He just wanted a moment more in the relative quiet, a moment more in the same space. His father clapped him hard on the shoulder, making him stumble. Good hustle at the end there, son. You just need to keep your head in the game from the jump. Got it. Yeah, Dad. Got it. The words were automatic, tasteless. All right. I've got a boosters meeting. Bo's locking up. Can you give him a hand? It wasn't a question. Coach Miller was already heading for the exit, his keys jangling, his mind on fundraising and strategy. He never looked back. And then it was just the two of them. The vast, empty gymnasium hummed with the sound of the overhead lights. The silence felt enormous, charged. Finn pushed himself up, his heart thumping in nervous, unsteady rhythm against his ribs. He could smell the clean, sharp scent of the floor polish underneath the lingering smell of sweat. Bo rolled the ball cage toward the equipment closet, the wheels squeaking a mournful complaint. I can get the rest, Finn said, his voice sounding too loud, too young. Bo stopped and turned. He didn't smile, but the harsh lines of his face softened almost imperceptibly. Appreciate it. Finn moved around the court, his footsteps echoing. He gathered the last few balls, his movements feeling self-conscious, exaggerated. He was aware of every inch of himself, of the way his sweaty shirt stuck to his back, of the unsteadiness in his hands. He rolled the balls toward the cage, avoiding Bo's eyes, focusing instead on the worn leather, the familiar pebbled texture. When the last one was secured, he turned and found Bo watching him, that same quiet, assessing look on his face. It wasn't a coach's look. It was something else, something he couldn't name. You all right, Finn? Bo's voice was low, calm. It didn't fill the space so much as it settled into it. Your dad's been riding you hard. Finn shrugged, a pathetic, jerky motion. It's fine. He just wants us to win state. It was the standard answer, the expected one. That's what he wants, Bo said, a strange emphasis on the pronoun. What about you? The question caught Finn off guard. No one ever asked him that. It was assumed his wants were identical to his father's, to the town's. He fumbled for a response, his mind blank. I want to win, too. Bo just nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. It felt like he could see right through the flimsy answer, down to the trembling uncertainty beneath. He turned and walked toward the closet, pulling the heavy cage behind him. Finn followed, feeling like a satellite pulled into a slow, inevitable orbit. Inside the narrow space, crowded with stacks of uniforms and first aid kits, the air was close, smelling of dust and disinfectant. Bo began wiping down the basketballs with a rag, a methodical, repetitive motion. Finn stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do, wanting to leave but physically unable to. You can head out, Bo said, not looking up from his task. I've got this. It's okay. I'll help. Finn reached for a rag, their fingers brushing as he took it. The contact was electric, a jolt that shot up his arm and settled, hot and heavy, in his chest. He pulled his hand back as if burned. He was sure Bo must have felt it, must have seen the panic in his eyes. But Bo's expression didn't change. He simply continued his work, his movements unhurried, his focus absolute. Finn started wiping down a ball, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. It was in this silence, in the shared, mundane task, that a new kind of communication began, one that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the charged space between two people in a small, dusty room at the edge of the world. He was terrified, and he had never felt more alive. That night became a pattern, an unspoken ritual carved out of the end of the day. Finn's father, consumed by the relentless machinery of a winning season, would leave him behind with an order to help Bo lock up. At first, Finn suspected it was a test, another of his father's character-building exercises. But as the weeks passed, he realized it was simpler than that. His father didn't see it. He didn't see the way the gymnasium transformed after the noise and the fury had bled out of it, leaving behind a cavernous silence that held them both. He didn't see the way Finn learned the rhythm of Bo's work, the methodical sweep of the mop, the precise click of the locks, the final pull on the heavy steel doors. He saw only a chore being completed, a responsibility fulfilled. For Finn, these closing duties were the most vital part of his day. He learned to read the landscape of Bo's silence. It was not an empty thing. It was rich with meaning. There was the tired silence that followed a brutal practice, where Bo's shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. There was the contemplative silence after a loss, where his gaze would be distant, replaying every missed shot, every flawed defense. And there was a rarer, more relaxed silence on the nights after a decisive win, when a ghost of a smile would touch his lips as he coiled the extension cords. Finn began to anticipate these moods, to move in harmony with them. He would work faster on the bad nights, trying to shorten the time Bo had to linger in his disappointment. On the good nights, he would draw out the tasks, finding one more thing to wipe down, one more corner to sweep, stealing minutes from the clock. Their conversations, when they happened, were spare, like stones dropped into a deep well. They spoke of basketball, mostly, of a flawed pick and roll, of the rival team's formidable center. Bo spoke about the game with a reverence Finn had never heard from his father. For his dad, it was about domination, about the mechanics of winning. For Bo, it was about geometry and instinct, about the beauty of a play executed to perfection. "You hesitate," Bo said one night, as they sat on the bleachers, the gym dark except for the single security light over the main doors. The words were delivered without judgment, a simple statement of fact. "Right before you drive to the hoop, you look for your dad." Finn stared at his own hands, at the calluses on his palms. He didn't deny it. "He's the coach. He's on the sideline," Bo countered softly. "You're on the court. The moment is yours. No one else's." He wasn't looking at Finn, but out at the shadowy expanse of the court, at the ghost of the game that still hung in the air. "You see the opening before anyone else does. I've watched you. You have the instinct. You just don't trust it." The words settled in Finn's chest, a warmth that spread through his limbs. To be seen so clearly felt like a revelation. His father saw a tool, a player to be sharpened and aimed. Bo saw him. The instinct he was talking about wasn't just on the court. It was the same pull that kept him here, in the echoing dark, long after he should have gone home. It was the instinct that told him this connection, however strange and undefined, was more real than anything else in his life. He wanted to tell him, to explain the gnawing confusion inside him, but the words wouldn't form. They were too new, too terrifying. "My old man," Bo said, his voice dropping lower, "thought I was wasting my life. A ball and a hoop. Said it was a child's game. He wanted me to take over his hardware store." He picked at a loose thread on the knee of his jeans. "I was good, really good. Had a scholarship offer, a small school up north. Nothing special, but it was a way out." Finn waited, holding his breath. Bo rarely spoke of himself, and this sudden crack in his stoic facade felt momentous. "Tore my ACL senior year. Preseason scrimmage," he let out a short, humorless breath. "And that was that. Stayed here. Worked for my dad for a while. Hated every minute of it. When your father got the head coach job, he asked me to help out. Felt right. Being here." He finally turned his head, his blue eyes finding Finn's in the dim light. "Sometimes the thing you're supposed to do isn't the thing everyone else has planned for you." The confession hung between them, a fragile bridge. Finn understood. He understood the suffocating weight of a pre-written life, the ache for something that was yours alone. In that moment, Bo wasn't just Coach Evans, his dad's quiet friend. He was someone who had been broken by the game and had still chosen to love it. Someone who had seen his own path diverge and had found a way to walk it anyway. He was a survivor. Finn felt a surge of something fierce and protective, a desperate need to shield this man from any more disappointment. The drives home started a few weeks later. Bo's old pickup truck was often the only vehicle left in the school parking lot besides Finn's own. One night, a freezing rain had begun to fall, coating everything in a treacherous, glittering sheet of ice. "Roads are getting slick," Bo said, zipping up his jacket as they stood under the weak light of the parking lot lamp. "You should follow me. I'll go slow." But Finn's car wouldn't start. The engine turned over with a pathetic, grinding groan before falling silent. The battery was dead. "Damn it," Finn muttered, slumping against the steering wheel. A moment later, a soft knock on the driver's side window. Bo stood in the freezing rain, his shoulders hunched against the wind. "No luck. Dead. Leave it. I'll give you a ride. We can deal with it tomorrow." The interior of Bo's truck smelled of coffee and something vaguely metallic, like old tools. It was clean but worn, the dashboard cracked and the seat covers frayed. It felt like a private sanctuary, a world away from the expectations of his father's pristine SUV. They drove in silence for the first few miles, the only sounds the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers and the low rumble of the engine. The heater blasted warm, dry air that felt wonderful on Finn's cold skin. He watched the familiar streets of his town slide by, transformed by the icy glaze. They looked alien and beautiful. He was intensely aware of Bo beside him, of the way his hands rested easily on the steering wheel, his knuckles scarred from a life of work Finn couldn't imagine. "You don't have to do this," Finn said, breaking the comfortable quiet. "My house is out of your way." "It's not a problem," Bo replied, his eyes on the slick road. "No, I mean all of it. Staying late. Helping me." Bo was quiet for a long moment. He downshifted as they started up the hill toward Finn's neighborhood. "Your father's a good man, Finn, and a hell of a coach. But he sees the team, the whole machine. Sometimes he forgets to see the individual parts." He glanced over at Finn, just for a second, but it was enough. "Someone's got to." Finn's throat went tight. He looked out his window, at the ice-sheathed branches of the oak trees lining the street, looking like they were made of glass. He felt like that, fragile, encased in something cold, terrified that the slightest pressure would shatter him. But in the warm cab of this truck, next to this quiet man, he felt, for the first time, that if he did break, someone might be there to notice. The unspoken thing between them was growing, taking up more and more space until the air in the small truck was thick with it. It was no longer just a shared understanding of basketball or a sympathy for familial pressure. It was something deeper, more personal, and far more perilous. And as Bo pulled up to the curb in front of his house, the engine idling, neither of them made a move to end the journey. They just sat, suspended in the warm silence, while the world outside froze over. The drives became their new ritual. Finn started leaving his own car at school, fabricating excuses about a faulty alternator or a slow leak in a tire. His father, ever distracted, never questioned it. The 15 minutes it took to get from the school to Finn's house became a pocket of time that belonged only to them. It was a space free from the judgment of the locker room, the demands of his father, the suffocating expectations of the town. In the close confines of the truck's cab, the world outside fell away, reduced to a blur of passing headlights and shadowy houses. It was here, enveloped in the darkness and the low hum of the engine, that their conversations deepened. They moved past the comfortable territory of basketball and into more treacherous waters. Finn found himself talking about the future, about the paralyzing fear of leaving this town and the equally terrifying prospect of staying. He confessed his disinterest in the business degree his father had preordained for him, the hollow feeling he got when he tried to picture himself in a suit, in an office. He spoke of a vague, unformed desire to work with his hands, to build things, a confession that sounded flimsy and childish even to his own ears. Bo listened. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just listened, his profile illuminated by the faint green glow of the dashboard lights. He would nod slowly, his eyes fixed on the road, and the quality of his attention made Finn feel as though his half-formed fears were valid, were worthy of consideration. And in return, Bo offered up small pieces of himself. He talked about the birds he watched in the woods behind his small, rented house, describing the flight of a hawk with the same precision he used to break down a basketball play. He mentioned a younger sister who lived in Oregon, a painter, his voice softening with a warmth Finn had never heard before. He spoke of the ache in his knee on cold days, a constant, physical reminder of a door that had closed forever. These fragments, these quiet admissions of longing and loss, were more intimate to Finn than any secret. They were the building blocks of the man he was coming to know, a man far more complex and melancholic than the stoic assistant coach he presented to the world. The attraction Finn felt was no longer just a physical pull, a confusing response to a kind look or a quiet presence. It was becoming a profound emotional resonance, a feeling of being understood in a way he had never thought possible. One night, the tension that had been simmering between them for months finally crested. It had been a particularly grueling practice, culminating in a screaming match between his father and the team's star player. The air was still crackling with residual anger when they finally locked the gym doors. Neither of them spoke as they walked to the truck, the cold night air a welcome shock after the heated atmosphere inside. Bo started the engine, but instead of pulling out of the parking lot, he let it idle, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "He crossed a line tonight," Bo said, his voice flat. Finn knew he was talking about his father. He's just stressed about the finals. The excuse sounded weak, a frayed rope of loyalty. There's a difference between pushing your players and breaking them, Bo said. He turned to look at Finn, his face carved into stark relief by a single, harsh security light. He shouldn't talk to you that way. To any of you. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be. The intensity in Bo's gaze was startling. It was fiercely protective, and it made Finn's breath catch in his throat. In that moment, the space between them shrank to nothing. Finn could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could smell the faint scent of wintergreen on his breath. The world narrowed to the confines of this truck, to the man sitting beside him. An impulse, powerful and undeniable, surged through him. He wanted to close the distance, to feel the rough texture of Bo's jacket under his hand, to see what would happen if he just reached. His hand lifted, a half-conscious movement. It hovered in the air between them for a heartbeat, a trembling, uncertain thing. Bo's eyes dropped to his hand, and then slowly, back up to his face. He didn't move. He didn't pull away. He just watched him, his expression unreadable, his body perfectly still. It was a moment of pure, terrifying possibility. The air was thick with it, a silence so profound Finn could hear the frantic beat of his own blood in his ears. He could do it. He could lean across the console, and everything would change. But the fear was a physical thing, a cold hand closing around his throat. He saw his father's face, contorted in rage and disgust. He heard the whispers that would follow them, the snickering in the halls, the word disgrace painted on their doors. He saw the life he knew, however suffocating, burning to the ground. His hand fell back into his lap, heavy as lead. The moment passed. The wire that had been pulled so taut between them went slack. Bo let out a slow breath, the sound barely audible. He turned his face forward, his gaze fixed on the empty parking lot. He put the truck in gear. "Let's get you home," he said, and his voice was rough, strained. The drive was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was not comfortable or contemplative. It was heavy with the weight of what had almost happened, of the choice Finn had made out of fear. When they pulled up to his house, Finn fumbled with the door handle, desperate to escape the suffocating tension. "Bo," he started, not knowing what he was going to say. An apology? An explanation? "It's late, Finn." Bo cut him off, his voice gentle but firm. His eyes were still on the windshield. "Get some sleep." Finn got out and closed the door, the sound echoing in the quiet street. He stood on the curb and watched as the red tail lights of the truck disappeared around the corner, leaving him alone in the cold, clutching a truth he had been too afraid to touch. The regret was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He had been offered a moment of honesty, and he had answered with cowardice. The days that followed were excruciating. The easy rhythm they had found was gone, replaced by a stilted, painful awareness. Finn avoided being the last one to leave the gym, making up excuses to his father, catching rides with teammates. He felt Bo's eyes on him during practice, but when he risked a glance, Bo would be looking away, his expression closed off, his posture rigid. The silence that had once been a comfort was now an accusation. The space between them, once charged with possibility, was now a dead, empty chasm. Finn felt the loss like a phantom limb, a constant, dull ache where something vital used to be. He was drowning in the noise of his own thoughts. He replayed the moment in the truck 1,000 times, each time picturing a different outcome. What if he had reached out? What if he had closed that small gap? Would Bo have recoiled in disgust? Or would he have met him halfway? The uncertainty was a torment. He had retreated into the safety of the familiar, but he found no comfort there. The world he had been so afraid of losing now felt like a prison he had locked himself inside. The casual homophobic jokes in the locker room, once just background noise, now felt like personal attacks, each one a sharp jab reminding him of his own cowardice. His father's booming presence was more oppressive than ever, his praise feeling like a condemnation of the person Finn was hiding. He knew he had to fix it. He couldn't bear the strained silence, the polite distance Bo had erected between them. He had to know if what he had felt in the truck was real or just a product of his own desperate imagination. After a week of this self-imposed exile, he forced himself to stay late. He watched his teammates leave one by one, his stomach twisting into a tight knot of anxiety. Finally, it was just him and Bo in the echoing gymnasium. Bo was at the far end of the court, methodically taking shots from the free throw line. The rhythmic thud of the ball and the soft whisper of the net were the only sounds. He didn't acknowledge Finn's presence. Finn walked slowly toward him, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Each step felt like a mile. He stopped a few feet away. Bo sank another free throw without looking at him. "I'm sorry," Finn said, the words coming out in a choked whisper. Bo retrieved the ball, spinning it in his hands. "For what?" "For that night. In the truck. He trailed off, the words failing him. "Scared. Confused. Cowardly." Bo finally stopped, holding the ball against his hip. He looked at Finn, and for the first time in a week, the mask was gone. His eyes were filled with a profound weariness, a sadness that seemed to go bone deep. "There's nothing to be sorry for, Finn." "Yes, there is," Finn insisted, his voice gaining a desperate strength. "I wanted to, but I couldn't. I was afraid." "We have a lot to be afraid of," Bo said quietly. It was an admission, a confirmation. It was everything. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and Finn felt a dizzying rush of terror and relief. It was real. It wasn't just him. "I hate it," Finn said, the words raw. "I hate being afraid." Bo looked at him for a long moment, his gaze searching Finn's face. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if coming to a decision. "Come on," he said, his voice low. "I'll take you home." The ride was different this time. The tension was still there, but it was no longer the strained, awkward silence of the past week. It was the taut, humming tension of the night it had all almost happened, the awareness of a truth that had finally been spoken, even in the most oblique of terms. When they arrived at Finn's house, Bo killed the engine. They sat in the humming silence, the moment stretching. Finn knew this was it. Another crossroads. He could get out of the truck and let things return to the way they were, a fragile truce built on unspoken acknowledgments. Or he could choose the path he had been too afraid to take a week ago. He thought of Bo's words in the gym. "We have a lot to be afraid of." The "we" echoed in his mind. It was the most beautiful, terrifying word he had ever heard. He was not alone in this. He turned in his seat, his whole body angled toward Bo. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Bo watched him, his expression somber. He seemed to be weighing the world in his mind. Then, slowly, deliberately, he mirrored Finn's action, turning to face him. He closed the small distance between them, not in a rush, but with a careful, questioning slowness. He raised a hand and gently, tentatively, cupped the side of Finn's face. His palm was rough, calloused, and impossibly warm against Finn's skin. It was not the touch of a coach or a friend's father. It was something else entirely, something achingly tender. Finn leaned into the touch, his eyes closing, a shudder of pure, unadulterated relief passing through him. The fear was still there, a cold shadow in the back of his mind, but for the first time, it was eclipsed by something more powerful. It was eclipsed by the simple, profound reality of this touch, in the quiet darkness of a parked truck on a sleeping street. Their new reality was a fragile, secret thing, constructed in the margins of their lives. It existed in the shared drives home, which now often involved a detour to a quiet, wooded overlook on the edge of town. There, with the lights of their small world spread out below them like a handful of scattered embers, they could talk. They would sit in the cab of the truck for hours, the engine off, the cold seeping in, and it wouldn't matter. The warmth they generated was enough. It was in these moments that Finn felt he was finally breathing real air. Bo would tell him stories about his brief time at college, the feeling of freedom he'd had, the crushing weight of its loss. Finn, in turn, would share his own anxieties, the words coming more easily now, stripped of their shame by Bo's quiet acceptance. Their connection was not just in words. It was in the way Bo's hand would find his on the center console, his thumb stroking the back of Finn's knuckles. It was in a shared look across a crowded gym that held more meaning than an entire conversation. It was in the one time Bo, seeing the exhaustion on Finn's face after a brutal week of practice and exams, had simply reached over and pulled him into a brief, firm hug. Finn had buried his face in the rough fabric of Bo's jacket, inhaling the scent of cold air and coffee, and felt a sense of peace that was so complete it bordered on pain. He was holding on to something precious and terrifying, a secret that both defined him and threatened to destroy him. The constant vigilance was exhausting. At school, at home, at practice, Finn felt like he was performing on a brightly lit stage. He had to measure every word, every glance. A casual question from his father, "What do you and Bo talk about on those drives?" could send a jolt of pure panic through him. He would mumble something about game plans and scouting reports, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. The deception was a heavy cloak, and some days he felt he would suffocate under its weight. He saw the whispers and stares that sometimes followed Bo, the way some of the other fathers on the booster club would talk to him with a forced, condescending heartiness. He was an outsider, a bachelor in a town of families, a man who had failed to launch according to their rigid standards. Finn felt a surge of protective anger whenever he witnessed it, a feeling so fierce it startled him. He was changing. The fear was still a constant companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was being replaced by a quiet, simmering anger and a stubborn resolve. He saw the world more clearly now, its casual cruelties, its narrow definitions of love and masculinity. He started pushing back in small ways. He argued with his father about a play call, not out of defiance, but with a reasoned logic that Bo had taught him to trust. He defended a nerdy kid in the locker room from the casual bullying of his teammates, earning him a few strange looks, but also a grudging respect. He was finding his own voice, his own moral compass, and it was pointing him in a direction that was terrifying and exhilarating. He was becoming someone he could respect, and he was doing it for himself and for Bo. The end of the season approached, bringing with it the heightened pressure of the playoffs. The town was electric with anticipation. The late nights at the gym grew longer, the practices more intense. The stolen moments between Finn and Bo became fewer, more fraught. The risk of discovery felt amplified under the glare of the town's obsessive focus. It was after the quarterfinal game, a nail-biting win that had left everyone drained and euphoric, that it happened. Finn was in the locker room, a towel around his neck, the celebratory shouts of his teammates echoing around him. He opened his locker to grab his street clothes, and a small, folded piece of paper fell out onto the floor. It was a piece of notebook paper, torn from a spiral. He picked it up, assuming it was a note from a friend, a joke. He unfolded it. The words were written in crude, blocky letters, pressed hard into the paper. "I see how you watch the coach. Sick faggot." The air rushed out of Finn's lungs. The noise of the locker room faded to a dull roar, the blood pounding in his ears. The words seemed to writhe on the page, alive and venomous. Sick faggot. They were the words from his nightmares, the words he had spent his entire life running from. He felt a wave of nausea, his legs suddenly weak. He looked around the room, his eyes darting from face to face. Who had done this? Was it one of them? The boy who had laughed too loud at a homophobic joke? The player who had always seemed to resent Bo's quiet authority? Or was it someone else entirely, someone who had been watching from the stands, from the shadows? The enemy was faceless, which made it all the more terrifying. It could be anyone. He shoved the note deep into his pocket, his hand trembling. He felt exposed, stripped bare under the fluorescent lights. The camaraderie of the team, the shared victory, all of it felt like a lie. He was an imposter among them, and someone knew. Someone had seen through his performance. He dressed in a fog, his movements stiff and robotic. He had to get to Bo. He had to show him. The thought of keeping this secret alone, of letting this poison fester inside him, was unbearable. The shared danger was the only thing that felt real. He fled the locker room, the sounds of celebration chasing him down the hall like a mocking laugh. The note in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric, branding his skin with its hateful message. The secret world he and Bo had so carefully constructed had just been breached. The outside world, in all its ugliness, had found the door. Finn found Bo in the small, windowless office he shared with the other assistant coaches. He was alone, sitting at his small metal desk, a stack of game tapes in front of him. The single desk lamp cast a small pool of weary light, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. He looked up when Finn entered, a flicker of a smile on his face from the night's victory. The smile vanished when he saw Finn's expression. "What is it?" Bo asked, his voice instantly serious. "What's wrong?" Finn couldn't speak. He closed the door behind him, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silent room. He walked to the desk and pulled the crumpled note from his pocket, his hand shaking so badly he could barely unfold it. He smoothed it out on the desk, under the harsh light of the lamp. Bo leaned forward, his eyes scanning the crude letters. Finn watched his face, searching for a reaction. He saw none. Bo's expression became utterly still, a mask of stone. The only movement was a muscle that clenched and unclenched in his jaw. He read the words once, then twice. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It felt like an eternity before he finally looked up, his blue eyes dark, unreadable. "Where did you find this?" His voice was dangerously quiet, stripped of all emotion. "In my locker," Finn whispered. Bo stared at the note for another long moment. Then he reached out and slowly, deliberately, folded it back along its original creases. He held the small square of paper between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of evidence. The calm, methodical way he handled it was more terrifying to Finn than any outburst would have been. "It could be a joke," Finn said, the words sounding hollow and desperate. "Someone messing around." "It's not a joke," Bo said, his voice a low growl. He didn't have to explain how he knew. They both knew. This was not the casual cruelty of a high school prank. This was targeted. This was a threat. Bo stood up and walked to the room's single, grimy window, which looked out onto the brick wall of the neighboring building. He stood with his back to Finn, his shoulders rigid. Finn's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a desperate need to say something, to fix this, but he had no idea what to say. The carefully built walls of their secret world were crumbling around them. "This is my fault," Bo said, his voice muffled. "I should have. I'm the adult. I should have protected you from this." "No," Finn said, stepping forward. "Don't say that. It's not your fault. It's theirs. Whoever wrote this, the anger he felt was a clean, hot flame, burning away some of the fear. This is what I was afraid of this hate. But being afraid in the truck that night, that was worse. Being alone with it was worse." Bo turned from the window, his face etched with a pain so deep it made Finn's own chest ache in sympathy. "What do we do, Finn?" It was the first time he had sounded uncertain, the first time he had asked Finn for guidance. The shift in their dynamic was seismic. Finn looked from Bo's anguished face to the small, hateful piece of paper on the desk. He saw two paths laid out before them. One was the path of retreat. They could end this, whatever it was. They could go back to being Coach Evans and Miller's kid. They could let the fear win, let the anonymous author of this note dictate the terms of their lives. The silence between them would return, but this time it would be a dead, permanent thing, a monument to their cowardice. The thought was unbearable. The other path was terrifying. It led into darkness, into uncertainty. It was a path where they would be exposed, judged, and possibly destroyed. But it was a path they would walk together. "We don't run," Finn said, his voice shaking but clear. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. This was his moment, the one on the court that Bo had told him to trust. His instinct. "We don't let them win. We don't let them make us hide." He walked to the desk and picked up the note. He looked at the ugly words one last time. Then he tore the paper in half, and then in half again, the sound of the ripping paper a small, defiant act in the quiet room. He dropped the pieces into the metal trash can. Bo watched him, a storm of emotions passing across his face. Fear, relief, and something that looked like awe. A slow, sad smile touched his lips. "You're not a kid anymore, are you?" he said softly. "No," Finn replied. "I'm not." The choice was made. It wasn't a plan. It offered no solutions and no guarantees of safety. But it was a declaration. They would not be defined by someone else's hatred. They would not sacrifice the one true thing they had found in a world of lies. Bo crossed the room and stood in front of Finn. He didn't touch him. He just looked at him, his eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. The fear was still there, a cold presence in the room, but it no longer had power over them. They were two people, standing together in a small, bare office, choosing honesty in the face of a threat, choosing themselves. The final game of the season was still to be played, but in that moment, Finn knew, with absolute certainty, that they had already won. The world outside had not changed, but they had. And that was everything.